The first thing I noticed about the gas station was how the darkness pressed in from every side, as if the world ended just beyond the flickering neon sign. My name is Jamie, and I took the night shift here because I needed the money, not because I believed the stories. The place sits alone on a stretch of highway, so empty you can drive for hours without seeing another set of headlights. The only company is the wind rattling the windows and the hum of the old refrigerators. On my first night, I arrived just before midnight, the air thick with the scent of gasoline and something else, something metallic, sharp, and wrong. The manager, a wiry man named Rick, handed me a battered notebook. "Read this before you do anything else," he said, his eyes darting to the windows. I flipped it open and saw a list of rules, each one stranger than the last. Rule 3. Never sell gas to anyone who doesn't have a reflection. Rule 7. If you hear knocking from the storage room, don't answer, no matter how much they beg. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Rick didn't smile. "You'll understand soon enough," he muttered, locking the door behind him as he left. Alone, I stood behind the counter, the rules heavy in my hands, the silence growing thicker by the minute. I wish someone had warned me before I took this job. If I'd known what really happens out here after midnight, I never would have walked through that door. But now, with the first knock echoing from the back room, I realize some rules are written in blood. I pulled my old sedan into the cracked parking lot, headlights sweeping over faded lines and a single, battered pickup truck. The gas station looked ordinary enough. 2 pumps, a flickering sign advertising coffee, and a row of dusty windows reflecting the endless night. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the engine tick and the wind whistle through the empty lot. It was just a job, I told myself. Just another paycheck. But as I stepped out, the cold bit through my jacket, sharper than it should have been for early autumn. The air felt heavy, as if the darkness itself was watching. Inside, the station was a patchwork of harsh fluorescent light and deep shadows. The shelves were stocked with the usual chips, candy, motor oil, but everything seemed a little too still, as if the place was holding its breath. Rick, the manager, stood behind the counter, counting bills with quick, nervous fingers. He looked up as I entered, his face creasing into a tight smile. "You made it. Good. You're right on time." His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if he was afraid of being overheard. A woman in a faded blue uniform was mopping near the coffee machine. She glanced up, her eyes tired but kind. "I'm Marlene," she said, offering a small wave. "Don't mind Rick. He's always jumpy on night shifts." Rick shot her a look, but she just shrugged and kept mopping. I tried to relax, but something about the way the shadows pooled in the corners made my skin crawl. Rick handed me a set of keys and the battered notebook. "Read the rules. All of them. Don't skip any." His tone left no room for argument. I nodded, tucking the notebook under my arm. Marlene finished her mopping and poured herself a cup of coffee, motioning for me to join her. "First night's always the weirdest," she said, her voice soft. "You'll get used to it. Or you won't." I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "What's so weird about it?" I asked, glancing around at the humming coolers and the faded posters on the wall. Marlene just smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You'll see." As Rick finished his count, he paused and looked at the clock. "Almost midnight. I'll be in the office if you need anything. Don't open the door unless I say it's me." He disappeared down a narrow hallway, the door clicking shut behind him. Marlene sipped her coffee, watching me over the rim of her cup. "If you hear anything strange, just stick to the rules. They're there for a reason." I nodded, trying to ignore the way the lights seemed to flicker just a little too often, or how the wind outside sounded almost like voices. The gas station felt normal, but underneath, something was wrong. I could feel it in the way Rick locked the doors, in Marlene's careful words, in the silence that settled over everything as the clock crept closer to midnight. Rick emerged from the office just as the clock above the counter ticked over to midnight. He moved with a kind of urgency, his eyes darting to the windows and the door as if expecting something or someone to appear. He set the battered notebook on the counter in front of me and tapped it with a finger stained by years of ink and oil. "Read these now," he said, his voice low. "Don't wait until you're bored or curious. Read them before anything else happens tonight." I opened the cover, expecting a list of closing procedures or maybe a checklist for cleaning. Instead, I found a page titled "Rules for Surviving the Night Shift." The handwriting was cramped and hurried, as if written in a rush. I read the first few aloud, my voice uncertain. Rule 1. Never unlock the front door after midnight, no matter who's outside. Rule 2. If a customer comes in and doesn't cast a shadow, don't serve them. Rule 3. Never sell gas to anyone who doesn't have a reflection. Rule 4. If you hear knocking from the storage room, ignore it. No matter how much they beg, don't answer. Rule 5. If the lights flicker 3 times in a row, hide behind the counter and don't move until they stop. I looked up, half expecting Rick to laugh, but his face was grave. Marlene, too, had gone still, her coffee forgotten in her hands. "You're serious?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "This is some kind of initiation, right?" Rick shook his head. "You think I'd joke about this? You think I'd make up rules like that for fun?" His voice was sharp, almost angry, but underneath I heard something else, fear. Marlene set her cup down, her hands trembling just a little. "We all thought it was a joke at first," she said quietly. "But you'll see. The rules are the only thing that keep us safe out here." I tried to laugh it off, but the words stuck in my throat. The rules were ridiculous, but the way Rick and Marlene watched me made it hard to dismiss them. I flipped through the rest of the notebook, finding more rules, each stranger than the last. If you see a child outside after 2 a.m., don't let them in. If the payphone rings, don't answer. If you find the bathroom door open when you know you closed it, lock it and walk away. My skepticism warred with a growing sense of unease. I wanted to believe it was all a prank, but the tension in the room was real. Rick leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Break a rule, and you'll find out why they exist. We've lost people before. Good people." I closed the notebook, the weight of it suddenly heavy in my hands. I told myself it was just a job, just a list of silly rules. But deep down, I wondered what had happened to the ones who didn't believe. The first hour passed in uneasy quiet. Marlene busied herself with inventory, humming a tune that sounded more like a lullaby than a pop song. I tried to focus on the register, counting bills and checking the receipt paper, but my eyes kept drifting to the notebook. The rules felt like a dare, a challenge to my common sense. I told myself I'd play along, at least for tonight. At 1:07 a.m., the bell above the door jingled. I looked up, startled. A man stepped inside, bundled in a heavy coat, his face hidden by a scarf and a battered baseball cap. He moved stiffly, as if the cold had seeped into his bones. Marlene glanced at him, then at me, her eyes wide. I remembered the first rule: never unlock the front door after midnight, no matter who's outside. But I hadn't unlocked anything. The door had been left on latch for late-night customers, just as Rick had shown me. The man shuffled to the counter, his gloved hands trembling as he pulled out a crumpled 20. "Pump 3, he rasped, voice muffled by the scarf. I hesitated, glancing at the clock. The rules didn't say anything about refusing service unless something was off. I looked for his reflection in the glass of the cooler behind him. It was there, faint but real. I checked the floor, his shadow stretched across the linoleum, distorted by the harsh lights. Still, something felt wrong. The air seemed colder, the silence heavier. Marlene hovered near the coffee machine, watching with a tension that made my skin prickle. I rang up the sale, handed him his change, and tried to smile. "Cold night," I said, my voice too loud in the empty store. He didn't answer. He just stared at me for a moment, eyes dark and unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. Then he turned and walked out, the bell jangling behind him. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Marlene came over, her face pale. "You checked, right?" she whispered. "His shadow, his reflection?" I nodded, still shaken. "Yeah, he was normal, I think." She nodded, but her hands were shaking. "Sometimes they look normal. You have to be sure. If you're not, don't serve them. It's not worth the risk." I glanced at the notebook, the rules suddenly feeling less like a joke and more like a lifeline. The man's car started outside, headlights sweeping across the windows before disappearing into the night. The silence returned, heavier than before. I tried to laugh it off, but the unease lingered. I realized then that the rules weren't just for show. They were a test, and I'd barely passed. I wondered what would have happened if I'd missed something, if I'd broken a rule without even knowing. The next few nights settled into a rhythm that was almost comforting. I learned the quirks of the old register, the way the receipt printer jammed if you didn't feed it just right, and how the coffee machine sputtered and hissed before finally brewing a pot. Marlene showed me how to restock the shelves, how to mop the floor so the tiles didn't get slippery, and which snacks the truckers liked best. She had a dry sense of humor and a way of making even the most tedious chores feel like a shared secret. We'd joke about the ancient candy bars that never seemed to expire, and the way the radio only picked up one station after midnight, a country channel that played the same 3 songs on repeat. But beneath the routine, something was always off. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of movement outside the windows, only to find the lot empty when I checked. The wind would howl through the cracks in the door, carrying with it a sound that was almost like laughter or maybe crying. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the mundane, counting inventory, wiping down counters, making small talk with Marlene. Rick was a constant presence, though he rarely left the office. He'd emerge every hour or so, checking the locks and peering out the windows with a look that bordered on paranoia. He never smiled, never joked, and never let his guard down. I asked him once how long he'd worked here. He just shrugged. "Long enough to know the rules matter," he said, then disappeared back into the office. One night, around 2:30 a.m., Marlene and I sat behind the counter, sipping coffee and sharing stories about our lives before the gas station. She told me about her daughter, who lived in another state, and how she sent money home every month. I told her about my old job at the grocery store, how I'd lost it when the place closed down, and how this was supposed to be temporary. We laughed about the weird customers and the time a raccoon tried to steal a bag of chips from the snack aisle. But even in those moments, the dread never fully left. The lights would flicker just once, and we'd both freeze, waiting to see if it would happen again. Sometimes, the payphone outside would ring, shrill and insistent, even though no one ever used it. Rick had warned me not to answer, and I never did. But the sound grated on my nerves, a reminder that the rules were always lurking in the background. One night, I found a note taped to the bathroom mirror. Remember the rules. The handwriting wasn't Rick's or Marlene's. I asked them about it, but they both denied leaving it. The next night, the note was gone, replaced by a smear on the glass that looked almost like a handprint. I started to notice other things, too. The way the clock above the counter would sometimes skip a minute, or how the same car would drive by 3 times in an hour, headlights off, never stopping. The sense of being watched grew stronger, a pressure at the back of my neck that never quite went away. Despite it all, I found myself caring about Marlene and even Rick in his gruff way. We were in this together, bound by the rules and the secrets of the night. The gas station became a strange kind of home, a place where the ordinary and the terrifying existed side by side. Every shift was a balancing act between routine and fear, between laughter and the knowledge that one mistake could mean disaster. And as the nights wore on, I realized that surviving here wasn't just about following the rules. It was about trusting the people beside you and hoping they'd do the same. It was a Thursday night when the routine finally shattered. The air outside was thick with fog, the kind that swallowed the world and pressed against the windows like a living thing. Rick was in the office, hunched over paperwork, and Marlene was restocking the cooler. I was behind the counter, flipping through the notebook again, trying to memorize the rules by heart. I'd started to believe in them, or at least in the fear they inspired. At 2:17 a.m., the payphone outside began to ring. The sound was sharp, slicing through the silence. I tensed, remembering the rule. If the payphone rings, don't answer. I glanced at Marlene, who had gone still, a carton of milk in her hand. Just ignore it, she whispered, her eyes wide. But the phone kept ringing, louder and more insistent. After a minute, Rick stormed out of the office, his face pale. Don't even think about it, he snapped, glaring at both of us. Let it ring. We tried to go back to our tasks, but the sound was relentless. It rang for 5 minutes, then 10. Each shrill peal seemed to dig under my skin, making it impossible to focus. Marlene's hands shook as she stacked bottles, and I could see the strain in Rick's jaw as he paced behind the counter. Then, as suddenly as it started, the ringing stopped. The silence that followed was worse, heavy and expectant. I let out a shaky breath, thinking it was over. That's when we heard the knocking from the storage room. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze, notebook clutched in my hands. Rule 4. If you hear knocking from the storage room, ignore it. No matter how much they beg, don't answer. But Rick was already moving, anger and exhaustion etched into every line of his face. I'm sick of this, he muttered, striding toward the back. It's just some damn prank. I'm not letting it mess with us anymore. Rick, don't. Marlene called, but he didn't stop. He yanked open the storage room door, flooding the hallway with harsh fluorescent light. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a cold wind rushed out, carrying with it a smell like rotting leaves and old metal. Rick staggered back, his eyes wide with terror. Something moved in the shadows beyond the door, something tall and thin, with too many joints and a face that flickered like a broken TV screen. It reached for him, its fingers impossibly long, and Rick screamed, a sound I'd never heard from him before. Marlene grabbed my arm, pulling me behind the counter. Don't look, she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't look at it. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart pounding. Rick's screams echoed through the station, then cut off abruptly. The wind died, and the silence returned, deeper than before. When I finally opened my eyes, the storage room door was closed. Rick was gone. No sign of a struggle, no blood, just the lingering scent of decay and the echo of his fear. Marlene and I stared at each other, the truth settling between us. The rules weren't just suggestions, they were the only thing keeping us alive. Breaking them had a price, and tonight, Rick had paid it. The stakes had changed. The gas station felt smaller, the darkness outside more alive. I realized then that survival wasn't guaranteed, not for any of us. The hours after Rick vanished felt endless. Marlene and I barely spoke, each of us haunted by the memory of his scream and the emptiness he left behind. I kept glancing at the storage room door, half expecting it to open again, but it remained stubbornly shut. The rules felt heavier now, not just words in a notebook, but a lifeline stretched thin. At 4:03 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. I jumped, heart hammering, but it was only a customer, a tall man in a faded green jacket, his face shadowed by the brim of a trucker's cap. He moved with a quiet confidence, as if he belonged here in the dead of night. Marlene stiffened when she saw him, but then relaxed, almost relieved. He walked straight to the counter, setting down a thermos and a pack of jerky. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice low and calm. There was something about him, an ease, a steadiness, that made the air feel less suffocating. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He glanced at the notebook on the counter, then at me. "You're new. You've seen what happens when the rules are broken." I swallowed. "Who are you?" He smiled, but it was sad. "Just someone who's been through this before. Call me Jack." He slid a small, worn token across the counter, a coin etched with strange symbols. "Keep this with you. It won't save you, but it might help you see what's real." Marlene watched him with a mixture of respect and fear. "Jack's been coming here longer than anyone," she said quietly. "He knows things. Things about the station, about what's outside." Jack nodded. "This place sits on a thin spot. The rules aren't just for you. They keep the other side from bleeding through. Break them, and you invite things that don't belong." He picked up his thermos, pausing at the door. "Remember, not everything that knocks wants to come in. Some things just want you to listen." With that, he disappeared into the fog, leaving behind the coin and a sense that, for now, we weren't entirely alone. The rest of the shift passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion. Marlene and I barely spoke, each of us clinging to the rules as if they were the only things keeping us tethered to reality. The coin Jack had given me felt warm in my pocket, a small comfort against the chill that had settled over the station. I kept replaying Rick's disappearance in my mind, wondering if there was something I could have done, some warning I could have given. But the rules were clear, and now I understood why. At 5:12 a.m., just as the sky outside began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, the lights in the station flickered once, twice, then 3 times in rapid succession. My heart seized. Rule 5. If the lights flicker 3 times in a row, hide behind the counter and don't move until they stop. I grabbed Marlene's arm, pulling her down with me behind the counter. We crouched in the cramped space, the hum of the refrigerators suddenly deafening in the silence. The lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness. I could hear Marlene's shaky breathing, the pounding of my own heart. Somewhere outside, something scraped against the glass, slow and deliberate. I squeezed the coin in my pocket, willing it to protect us, to keep whatever was out there at bay. Then, the front door rattled violently, as if someone, or something, was trying to force its way inside. The bell above the door chimed, but the sound was warped, stretched into a low, mournful wail. I pressed myself closer to the floor, remembering Jack's words. Not everything that knocks wants to come in. Some things just want you to listen. A voice drifted through the darkness, soft and pleading. Please, let me in. It's so cold out here. I just need to use the phone. It sounded like my mother, her voice trembling with fear. I knew it couldn't be her. She lived 3 states away, but the urge to stand, to open the door, was almost overwhelming. Marlene gripped my hand, her nails digging into my skin. Don't listen, she whispered. It's not real. It's never real. The voice changed, becoming deeper, angrier. You can't ignore me forever. Sooner or later, you'll have to open the door. The scraping grew louder, more frantic. I shut my eyes, focusing on the coin, on the rules, on the memory of Rick's scream. Suddenly, the storage room door slammed open, the sound echoing through the station. Cold air rushed out, carrying with it the stench of rot and decay. I heard footsteps, heavy, dragging, moving toward us. Marlene whimpered, burying her face in her hands. I risked a glance over the counter. Something tall and impossibly thin stood in the center of the store, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. Its face was a blur, shifting and flickering like static on a broken television. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, its head swiveling toward the counter. Why do you hide? It hissed, its voice a chorus of whispers. You broke the rules. Now you belong to us. I ducked back down, heart racing. The thing moved closer, its footsteps echoing on the linoleum. The lights flickered back on for a split second, illuminating the creature in stark, unnatural light. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, its eyes nothing but empty sockets. It reached for the counter, its fingers elongating, twisting around the edge. I remembered Jack's coin, the strange symbols etched into its surface. Desperate, I pulled it from my pocket and held it up, hoping for a miracle. The creature recoiled, its form flickering and distorting. It let out a shriek, a sound that rattled the windows and made my teeth ache. The lights flickered again, then steadied. The creature staggered back, its body dissolving into a cloud of black smoke. The front door burst open, the bell shrieking in protest. The smoke poured out into the dawn, vanishing as the first rays of sunlight touched the parking lot. For a long moment, Marlene and I stayed behind the counter, too afraid to move. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of birds greeting the morning. When we finally stood, the store looked the same as always, shelves stocked, coffee brewing, sunlight streaming through the windows. But the air felt different, charged with the memory of what had happened. I looked at Marlene, her face pale but determined. We survived, she whispered, her voice trembling. We followed the rules, and we survived. But I knew it wasn't over. The rules had been broken, and something had gotten in. The gas station would never be the same, and neither would I. The coin in my hand was warm, pulsing with a strange energy. I slipped it back into my pocket, a silent promise to never forget what I'd seen. As the sun rose higher, I realized that the real horror wasn't what waited outside in the darkness. It was knowing that, at any moment, the rules could fail, and when they did, there would be no one left to warn the next person who walked through that door. The morning light felt harsh, almost unreal, as it spilled across the linoleum and painted the gas station in gold. Marlene and I moved through the store in silence, cleaning up spilled coffee and righting toppled displays. The normalcy of it all felt like a cruel joke. Every so often, I'd catch her glancing at the storage room door, her lips pressed tight, as if she expected it to swing open again at any moment. I found myself clutching Jack's coin, tracing the strange symbols with my thumb. The memory of the creature's shriek, the way it recoiled from the coin, replayed in my mind. I wanted to believe it was over, that the rules had saved us. But the emptiness where Rick should have been was a constant reminder of what we'd lost. When the day manager arrived, Marlene pulled her aside, whispering in low, urgent tones. I watched from behind the counter, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. The day manager nodded, her face grave, and handed me a new copy of the rules, freshly written, but the same as before. "You did well," she said quietly. "Most don't last their first breach. The rules aren't just for you. They're for everyone. This place, it's a barrier. The rules keep the worst of it out." I stared at the list, the words blurring as exhaustion set in. "What happens if we stop following them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She met my gaze, her eyes tired. "Then the things outside get in. And once they're inside, they don't leave. Not really. That's why we can't let the rules die, no matter what it costs." Marlene joined me at the counter, her hand resting on my shoulder. "We lost Rick because he broke a rule. We can't bring him back, but we can make sure it doesn't happen again." The weight of it all settled on me. The fear, the responsibility, the knowledge that one mistake could doom us all. I thought about the people who'd worked here before me, the ones who hadn't made it, and wondered how many names the darkness had claimed. As I left the station that morning, the sun already high in the sky, I realized I'd never look at the world the same way again. The rules weren't just a list, they were a lifeline, a fragile thread holding back the night. And now, I was part of the cost. A week later, the gas station felt both unchanged and forever altered. The shelves were restocked, the floors scrubbed clean, and the coffee brewed as usual, but the air was heavier, as if the building itself remembered what had happened. Marlene and I worked our shifts with a quiet understanding, never speaking of Rick or the thing that had come through the storage room. We just followed the rules, every night, without question. On Friday, a new hire arrived. His name was Tyler, a college kid with a nervous smile and a habit of checking his phone every few minutes. He looked around the station with the same skepticism I'd worn on my first night, oblivious to the weight of the place. Marlene introduced us, then handed me the battered notebook. "You're the one who should do it," she said softly. I took Tyler aside, away from the hum of the coolers and the glare of the lights. He watched me, waiting for the usual rundown of tasks and closing procedures. Instead, I handed him the notebook, my fingers lingering on the cover. "Before you do anything else, read this. Every word. Don't skip any, and don't laugh it off. The rules are the only thing keeping us safe here." He flipped through the pages, eyebrows raised. "Is this some kind of hazing thing?" I shook my head, meeting his gaze. "No, it's not a joke. You'll understand soon enough. Just promise me you'll follow them, no matter how strange they seem." He shrugged, still unconvinced, but I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Sure," I promised on him, walked away, the notebook tucked under his arm, and felt a chill settle in my bones. I remembered how easy it had been to doubt, how quickly that doubt had turned to terror. The rules had saved me, but only because I'd learned to respect them, because I'd seen what happened when they were broken. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first shadows crept across the parking lot, I stood behind the counter, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Somewhere outside, the darkness waited, patient and hungry. I wondered how many times this cycle had played out, how many new faces had come and gone, each one thinking they were different, each one learning the truth too late. The bell above the door jingled, and I glanced at the clock. Midnight. I looked at Tyler, who was reading the rules with a frown, and felt a surge of hope and dread. The rules would hold, for now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that one night, someone would forget or stop believing, and the darkness would finally get what it wanted. And when that happened, who would be left to warn the next person who walked through that door?